Today, George Washington and Abraham Lincoln are often seen to be as serious and solemn as their carved faces on Mount Rushmore suggest. But though both presidents presided over important eras in American history, each had another side that the history books often skip over.
The image of George Washington, for example, as the president who could not tell a lie, who cut down a cherry tree and had wooden teeth, doesn't exactly accurately represent who he really was. For starters, his teeth weren't even made of wood, and though he famously led troops in the battle for American independence, he actually lost more battles than he won in his military career.
The same goes for Abraham Lincoln. Before he became the president who steered the United States through the Civil War, he had more success as a wrestler than a politician, and once nearly got into a duel with broadswords after mocking the Illinois state auditor. Behind his careworn face, Lincoln had a sharp sense of humor and a love for animals, especially cats.
These presidents may be best known for their accomplishments in the face of adversity, but they definitely had a lighter side. Washington and Lincoln, often remembered to be as stoic as their statues across the nation, were, after all, human at heart. You're listening to History Uncovered, brought to you by the digital publisher All That's Interesting, where we explore the uncharted corners of the natural world in the world past.
I'm All That's Interesting staff writer Kalina Fraga.
And I'm All That's Interesting staff writer Austin Harvey.
Today, we're pulling back the curtain on two of the most famous American presidents, George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. Well, when it comes to George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, there's probably a couple of facts, I'll put big quotes around those facts that people know about them, that we'll discuss now. One thing for Washington is this idea that he had terrible teeth and that his dentures were made of wood. But that's not the whole story, is it?
Right. He did have bad teeth. That's true. Do you know why he had to get dentures in the first place?
He had terrible problems with his teeth, and he really tried to take care of them, but I guess in the 18th century, that was easier said than done. I think in his 20s, he'd lost a lot of teeth. He'd had painful surgeries. When he became president, he only had one real tooth left. He's had horrible luck with his teeth, yeah.
Apparently, one of the big things that ruined his teeth was that he would use them to crack open walnut shells.
Ugh. Yikes.
Not, disclaimer, get a nutcracker. Because obviously not something that's good for your teeth. But then in addition to just a million other things and just living in the time he did, had no teeth. So he did have dentures. They were not made of wood. They were made out of a weird combination of gold, ivory, carved animal bones, and then actual human teeth, mostly purchased from African-American slaves.
Yeah.
Which is gross.
Beyond gruesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty awful.
I don't like the idea of real tooth dentures. When people get real hair extensions, that's fine. I don't want another person's tooth in my mouth.
Yeah. It's interesting. I guess back in the day, dentists would go and they'd buy teeth. People who were poor would sell their teeth too. And then when they went to their patients, they could be I have all these sizes and colors and I'll fit them.
You could really customize your mouth.
Yeah. That was the idea.
Yeah.
It's pretty gross,
having
though.
A grill, but the old school version of it.
Yeah. I think some of Washington's dentures are at Mount Vernon still.
I think they are, yeah.
Plantation.
Yeah. I saw a picture of one of the pairs and they are, they're not good looking still, even.
Yeah, they look pretty uncomfortable. And I know that he found them to be very uncomfortable he was very self-conscious about them. And
yeah, that was apparently one of the reasons that he just never smiled was because he just did not like the dentures. And then I also found out that in the mornings he would eat hoe cakes with syrup, which is just cornmeal pancakes. But he would have his servants cut them up into really tiny pieces so that they'd be easier for him to chew.
Oh, wow.
Which
makes sense.
I say chew lightly. I'd imagine if they're coated in enough syrup, they kind of just melt onto your tongue at a certain point.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that sounds pretty awful. Take care of your teeth.
Modern dentistry is a lot better, but still take care of your teeth.
Yeah. They're very important.
If you take anything from this podcast episode, it's take care of your teeth.
Go to the dentist.
Go to the dentist. But you had some stuff about Lincoln, particularly about his beard.
Yes.
Which
well,
I'm curious about.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same kind of thing with Washington, where like if there's one thing you know about Lincoln, it's that he has a beard. But there's kind of a cute story behind it. You know, like with anything, there's sort of like, is this the reason why he grew the beard? But the story is that when he was running for president in 1860, this little girl wrote him a letter. She was 11. And she said that if he lets his whiskers grow, she'll get everyone to vote for him. And he has a really thin face. She thinks that having a beard would help. And she said she thinks that all the ladies like whiskers and they would tease their husbands to vote for you and then you would be president. And Lincoln actually responded to her letter and he said, as to the whiskers, having never worn any, do you not think people would call it a piece of silly affection if I were to begin it now? But he did grow beard, and like whether or not that was the reason why, like he famously had a beard, and he was the first, like there were a couple of like sideburns on presidents before Lincoln, but he was the first one to like rock a beard. And then it became a thing for a long time afterwards. For the next like 50 years, almost everyone had beards.
Yeah, I guess I never thought about that. I don't remember the last time I've looked at it. You know, they used to hand out those like rulers with the timeline of the presidents.
Yes.
Don't remember the last time I looked at one of those. But yeah, I guess it never stuck out to me that Lincoln would have been like one of the first or the first to have a beard.
Yeah.
And I feel like we've kind of gone back on it now. Like, who's the last president to have a beard?
So the last person to have facial hair was Harry Truman, but he had one, it was very briefly, he had a mustache after winning in 1948. But most presidents in the 20th century have been clean shaven. I think Taft was the last one to have like a beard, and that was in the 1910s.
And now, a small correction by Kalina.
Taft actually just had a really fantastic mustache. So the last president to have a beard was Benjamin Harrison at the end of the 19th century. So it's been a minute.
No, this was fun to look into because, like you said, you're more of a fan of presidential history.
I am, yeah.
I am, in general, just not a fan of American history. It's just not something that ever really sticks out to me. So I didn't know much of anything going into this. So when I learned all this stuff about George Washington, I was like, oh, that actually is neat. And the thing I think I forget the most, because modern politicians are so... they're like, you know, they're career politicians 90% of the time. And so you start to look into their past and it's like, okay, well, when he was 25, he did this thing and ran for local whatever. And it turned into now they're the president. Back in the day, like Washington was just a dude. He was a farmer and he was a soldier. And then apparently after he stopped being president, he just got really into farming again. And this is where I found out, like, he loved breeding animals.
He did.
Which is so interesting. And the variety of animals that he bred, too. Apparently, from what I gathered, Washington is often credited by historians as America's first mule breeder. And they think that his stock was like the start of the stock that most of the South operated with in his time.
Oh, wow.
Which is wild to think that. I don't know. It's just really interesting that I would just give up at a certain point of doing things. I'd be like, I've done enough stuff. And he's like,
I feel like he was like, finally, I can be a farmer and like leave, politics behind. He was so happy. I've been to Mount Vernon and it's huge and he has everything set up for crops and animals. And yeah, that was his passion, I think. He was really happy to go back to that life. Yeah.
Yeah, he was breeding all these mules at Mount Vernon. He also had a ton of bird species. Like he had canaries, green parrots, cockatoos. The jury's out, but some people say there's evidence to suggest he had a pet goldfish.
Interesting. The jury's out about that? That's interesting.
The jury's out. Everything I found said there's evidence that suggests he had a pet goldfish.
Oh, wow.
Which
next time I go to Mount Vernon, I'll try to like stump them with that question.
I'm curious.
Did Washington have
what's
goldfish?
The evidence? Like a bowl? Like a fish bowl?
Yeah, I'm curious too. There must be some reference to it in like letters or something. I don't know.
Yeah. But above all else, I think I'm cautious to say Washington was a fan of dogs, and I'll get into that in a minute. He liked breeding hunting dogs. I know that. The American Kennel Club cited him as the father of the American Foxhound, so that speaks to itself.
Yeah.
They think he also influenced the creation of the blue tick coonhound, the American English coonhound, and the Treeing Walker coonhound on his quote-unquote quest for a superior dog, but he also was a bit of an elitist. And so he liked, a bit. He didn't like mixed breed dogs. He had a lot of purebreds. He had Dalmatians, foxhounds, French hounds, greyhounds, Italian greyhounds, mastiffs, Newfoundlands, pointers, spaniels, terriers. All these dogs did not like mixed breed dogs. And he wasn't exactly kind in his approach to dogs that he didn't like. Puppies that didn't live up to his standards, he just didn't keep, which is one of the nicer things he did. I found one story. He was convinced that his slaves' dogs were killing his sheep, and so he ordered almost all of the dogs to be hanged.
What? Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah, which... I mean,
also really dramatic.
Euthanasia aside, right? Like
they had
hanging
like
them,
guns,
right?
Yeah, that's awful. Or giving them away. Yeah. I don't know. There were solutions,
right?
He could have found.
Yeah, he apparently also drowned some.
Oh God.
So, yeah, that's why I was hesitant to say he liked dogs, but he had a lot of them.
Well. Lincoln was totally different because he loved animals.
Actually loved them, not.
Yeah, he did. He he had sons, and in the White House, they had a lot of pets. They had cats, dogs, rabbits, turkeys, horses, and goats. Lincoln was the first president to make a portrait of his dog, Fido. So that's something we all do now, but Lincoln was the
George
first.
Bush, not that original.
Right. Yeah. And Lincoln loved cats. He would like hold them for like 30 minutes and just like talk to them. And there's this one famous anecdote where he was at a dinner at the White House and one of their cats jumped up on the table and he fed it with a fork. And his wife was so like, don't do that. Don't feed the cat at the table. And Lincoln said, if this gold fork was like good enough for James Buchanan, who was his predecessor, then it's good enough for Tabby. So he was a big animal fan.
I like that. That's nice.
Yeah. There's also, it's like moving towards another point, but he always kind of let his sons do whatever they wanted and was very lenient with them, especially his son Tad, because his older son Willie died in the White House, so Tad could kind of get away with anything he wanted. But at one point, someone sent the family a turkey for Christmas dinner, and Tad like just fell in love with the turkey. And when Lincoln was like, we have to kill it and eat it, someone sent it to us to eat, Tad said, he's a very good turkey and I don't want him killed. So Lincoln wrote like basically a pardon for the turkey, and he remained a pet in the Lincoln White House.
Oh, that's fun.
For at least a year after that. Yeah. So like the pardoning of the turkey tradition technically didn't start with Lincoln. Like it sort of came later with other presidents, but
yeah, it's got its roots there though. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It was a cute story. Yeah.
I do the same thing. I don't pardon turkeys. I feed the dogs with a fork, and now they've learned bad habits. So,
wow.
But that's the kind of tomfoolery I respect in my presidents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that better than getting rid of unwanted dogs. I'd much rather have them feed cats with forks. Yeah.
You gotta love a good man who loves his animals.
Yeah. Yeah, and Lincoln really did seem to. Tons of animals in the Lincoln White House.
Are there any other presidents who like famously had pets?
Oh yeah.
I mean, you would know
Thomas
more
Jefferson
than I would.
Had a lot of them did. I mean, Thomas Jefferson had a ton of animals and they all had really cool names. I can't remember, but he had horses with cool names and like songbirds, and like in the 90s, Bill Clinton had a cat, and yeah, like you said, Bush had the dog, and I think most presidents have had a pet. Yeah,
I didn't know if I know in England the Queen was big with the corgis. So I didn't know if there I didn't know if there was an American equivalent of like Teddy Roosevelt had famous cockatoo.
There was I guess in the 1920s, someone sent Calvin Coolidge and his family, a raccoon to be eaten, and they instead adopted it. Its name was Rebecca. And there were photos of the first lady like holding the raccoon. I think it might have been at the Easter egg roll, but anyway, she's holding the raccoon, and like the raccoon has a little leash that's just like in her arms. And
I love that.
It did bite Calvin Coolidge at one point, at which I think maybe was sent away after that. But yeah, pet raccoon.
Did people eat raccoons? Was that a thing?
I think this raccoon came from like the Midwest, and maybe it was more of a thing there.
It's a thing in the Midwest. Got it.
Yeah, I think it might have been. I don't want to insult anyone from the Midwest, but
if you're listening to this and you're from the
story.
Midwest, send us an email or an Instagram message confirming or denying whether or not you still eat raccoons. This is really important to me.
It is important. I'm curious too.
I just want to know.
Maybe we'll find out. Yeah.
Another thing I appreciate in a president, a man who knows what he likes to drink.
Yeah, I've heard that Washington was quite the drinker.
He was a boozy man. I did read he practiced moderation very well. So he was not, no one's saying George Washington was an alcoholic. We're not saying that. We're just saying the guy enjoyed a drink. But I did not know that he actually had a distillery, and it was recreated in 2007. So you can go visit it today. And I think it's at Mount Vernon.
What?
So if you happen to go back, they sell Washington whiskey, which is apparently pretty good from what I read. I haven't tried it, but I do like whiskey, so I'm curious.
Yeah, I'm curious too. I'm actually going to DC in a couple of weeks, so maybe I'll go back to Mount Vernon and get some Washington whiskey. Yeah.
Well, if you do, we have to do a follow up and see how the whiskey is.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, for sure.
But this distillery he started, I think the funniest thing to me to go on a mini tangent was we had a president who had a distillery and then someone still proposed prohibition. Mm-hmm. Just a little bit, one of those weird American ironies. But
I've often found that like the presidents who were like, oh, we're not drinking, like usually they were drinking.
Oh, they always were. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like everyone who pushed for I actually did a post for the website about speakeasies, and you can see all of the prohibition officers are sitting there drinking it. So it's like, cool, guys. Great. There's a reason it didn't work out.
Yeah. No one was on board. I have another fact about Washington that I just remembered about his drinking. Actually, it relates to his teeth. He would drink Madeira wine so much that it would discolor his teeth, which is his dentures, which is why some people think they're made of wood, because it had the kind of veiny look like a piece of wood might have.
Yeah.
And his dentist even like got after him and was like, you have to stop drinking so much Madeira wine. It's staining these dentures. Funny. Yeah.
Yeah, especially
he was a big fan of that.
If he had ivory and stuff, the grooves of it would definitely stain. That's really funny.
Yeah. Yeah, he was a big drinker.
Ironically, if he did have wooden teeth, it would have just been nothing but like helpful for this.
Well, wouldn't the alcohol like eat away at the wood?
I was gonna say it'd probably soak into it. You'd get an even stronger flavor out of it when you drink.
You'd have like the worst breath, I think.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, he probably. I'm gonna venture to say he didn't have good breath still. That's
probably true. If he had like rotten teeth and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But some quick facts about this distillery. It opened in October 1797, and according to the 1810 census, the state of Virginia alone at that time had more than 3,600 distilleries, but Washington's was the biggest.
Wow. 3,600?
In just the state of Virginia.
Yeah. Huh.
But
I wonder how many there are now, if there's more or less.
I'm curious also. But so you think about that. There's 3,600 in Virginia. There were, however many states there were in 1797. Washington's was the biggest in the country.
Wow.
So not even just in Virginia. It was the biggest in the country.
I wonder if there was like name recognition where people were like, oh, it's Washington's whiskey. Like,
for sure.
Raise a glass for the president.
Yeah, for sure. Well, when you hear how much he was able to produce, it had to be the novelty of it, at least in some capacity, because to paint an image, most whiskey distilleries at the time were about 800 square feet. His was 2,250, so nearly 3 times as large as the other ones.
Huh.
In 1799, his distillery produced 11,000 gallons of whiskey.
Whoa.
That netted him a profit of $7,500, which if you adjust for inflation and bring it to modern currency, that is $120,000 in that year.
Wow. Not bad.
So, yeah, it's not bad. Shabby. Washington's, he knew what he was doing.
I wonder why it closed.
Yeah, I don't know. It
sounds like it closed eventually and then reopened sort of recently.
Yeah, it says they recreated it, so I'm not sure if it... Well, I wonder, it probably should have looked into this more. I'm curious if Prohibition had something to do with that.
Yeah. Or maybe something like, maybe it could have been like the Civil War too. It was just like there weren't enough,
That's right. That did happen.
That did happen. Yeah, it did.
But yeah, it was a successful on top of the farming too. So he's out there making mules and
busy
dogs.
Guy.
And do you think oh man, it's probably not. But I'm curious if you trace back like the origins of the cocktail, the mule, like a Kentucky mule or a Moscow mule or whatever. There's probably no relation to George Washington.
Probably not.
I think we need to make a history themed drink called the Washington Mule.
So it'd be whiskey and then something else.
Yeah, a mule has ginger beer, but maybe you have to specifically use Washington whiskey.
Yeah. Washington whiskey, ginger beer. I feel like it should have like one other ingredient.
There's usually like a splash of lime.
How about a splash of Madeira?
There you go. From what you've put in our little outline and what I've gathered here, Lincoln also had an alcohol-laced history before he was president.
Sort of. So I dug into this a bit more, and it's sort of interesting. He did own a store in Illinois with someone else that some people have said they also served liquor, but it's sort of unclear if that happened when they coned it together or after Lincoln left. But Lincoln really wasn't a big drinker at all. Okay. He said that drinking made him feel flabby and undone, so he was not known to like really drink a whole lot. And one of his associates said that he'd seen Lincoln like lift up a barrel of whiskey and like pretend to drink from it, but never actually like drink.
Okay, so he didn't enjoy drinking, but he did bartend.
Maybe.
Okay, maybe.
He didn't seem to mind when like other people drank. There's a famous story about how when Ulysses S. Grant was the general of the Union Army, someone at the White House was saying, oh, Grant's an alcoholic, which was true. And Lincoln said, let me know what kind of whiskey Grant drinks and I'll send it to all the other commanders because Grant's winning wars. He's winning the war. And like, if it takes whiskey, if it takes being drunk, then like, fine.
Fair enough.
I'll do it. I'll send whiskey to everyone. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But yeah, Lincoln wasn't a huge drinker himself.
I like that term though, flabby and undone.
Flabby and undone.
I think that's a good name for my
something.
Memoir.
It's a good one. Yeah. So yeah, Lincoln had no great love for drinking, but he and Washington both had some experience with love in their lives.
Yeah, Washington's romantic saga. Do you know anything about this before I get into the context?
I think he might have courted someone. Is that the right word? And she chose someone else, but is that the story?
It's kind of the story.
Okay.
You're not wrong. There's just more of it's more of a nuance. Weeks before his own wedding, Washington wrote a letter to his own wedding to Martha. Yeah. He wrote a letter expressing his love, but not to her. He wrote it to a childhood friend named Sally Fairfax, who happened to be the wife of one of his best friends, George Fairfax.
Drama.
And it's a long letter and it's written in 1700s language. So there's a lot of commas and em dashes next to each other. But I took a small snippet of it here. He wrote, "You have drawn me, dear madam, or rather have I drawn myself into an honest confession of a simple fact. Misconstrue not my meaning, 'tis obvious, doubt it not, nor expose it. The world has no business to know the object of my love, declared in this manner to you when I want to conceal it. One thing above all things in this world I wish to know, and only one person of your acquaintance can solve me that, or guess my meaning. But adieu to this, till happier times, if I ever shall see them." Which,
Washington.
Yeah, a lot of the letter reads like, in today's terms, it would be like, "Hey, Sally, there's kind of someone I like, and you know her, you know who she is."
You know her really well.
He never directly said it, but by the end of the letter, it's very clear. Yeah, exactly. But again, this was weeks before he was getting married.
Wow.
So, and to one of his best friend's wives. So a hopeless romantic,
I guess
George
so,
Washington was. Maybe not so hopeless, but definitely kind of casts some doubt on the whole "I never tell a lie" facet of his personality as well.
Yeah, I feel like I've read, there's a really good book about Washington. It's on the ground somewhere. It's called You Never Forget Your First. And it's about Washington, but like kind of in it's written in a conversational way. And it might have been this book, but I think he like might have had like an affair with someone at one point while he was married, but there's not very much evidence. And
Mr. President.
I know.
Really setting the precedent for Clinton there, huh? And JFK.
Yeah, I think a couple of, and like several others. Yeah.
Probably most of them.
A lot of them had little affairs. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I tried to see if I could find out anything about when George met Sally, but all I could find was that they were...
I just watched that movie for the first time.
When Harry Met Sally?
Yeah.
Great movie.
It's a great movie, yeah.
Yeah, George and Sally met. He was a teenager, and that's all I could find. A lot of historians have said he was a very awkward teenager, and they credit Sally with kind of teaching him how to engage socially with wealthy and powerful people, because him being a young, humble farmer, not knowing how to engage in these kind of high society situations, she was the person who introduced him to that. And apparently his love just never faded.
Wow. Well, I guess he used what she taught him, because Martha Washington was a very wealthy widow, and that worked out.
Yeah.
In the end.
So good on you, George.
Yeah. Well, Lincoln had had a couple of love affairs before his marriage to Mary. I think an interesting thing about Mary Lincoln is that she was not liked in her life, especially by people who loved Lincoln. So any history about him by his friends often like treats her pretty poorly. And there's even, I'm pretty sure I read this somewhere, that, you know, she's always referred to as Mary Todd Lincoln, but she never went by that in her life. She always went by Mary Lincoln. So they added her, like made a name as a way to, but anyway, so when Lincoln was a young man, there were like two women he fell in love with. And one of them, Anne Rutledge, got sick and died. And Lincoln was so depressed that he would like wander around the woods with a rifle, and his friends were like very concerned about him, because he was a very like, people say, melancholy type guy, and so like this did not help his low moods. But so I said all that about Mary Lincoln because there's some interesting anecdotes that came out when they got married. One of Lincoln's friends claims that Lincoln said that he thought he did not love her as he should, and he would do her a great wrong if he married her. And he told someone else, it would just kill me to marry Mary Todd. Probably the worst, though, is that as he was getting dressed for the wedding, someone asked him where he was going, and he said, I guess I'm going to hell.
Oh my God. So, why did they get married? But
there's like other evidence, too. Well, I don't know if this is evidence exactly, but their son was born like almost exactly 9 months later. So there's like some speculation that they kind of had to get married. But, you know, like she was a difficult person, and she had a temper and could be a lot to handle, but she was very, you know, supportive of him.
Throughout his life, George Washington had so many health problems. I mean, beyond his teeth. He had diphtheria, tuberculosis, smallpox, malaria, dysentery, quinsy, carbuncle, and pneumonia, all at different points in his life. None of them took him out. He was fine.
Yeah.
And if I've learned anything from playing the Oregon Trail, dysentery can knock you down real fast.
Sure can.
He also nearly drowned in an ice-clogged river. He was at Fort Necessity when it was burned to the ground and all of the people inside were massacred. Survived that one.
I think that was kind of his fault.
Yeah, well, yeah. But he made it out.
He made it out.
The next couple things all happened in the same battle. Two different horses were shot out from beneath him. He was not hit by 4 bullets, but they passed close enough to him that they could scrape up his clothing.
Wow.
And I phrased that like I had a third thing, but I only actually had 2 things. But
horses and bullets, that's, wow.
Yeah, that's a lot. One battle, too, which is, you know, it's like, they just couldn't hit him. But the irony is the thing that got him in the end was just a cold.
Yeah.
He got a cold and then contracted epiglottitis. I'm going with that pronunciation.
I've never said that word
wrong.
out loud before, but yeah, you're right.
Epiglottitis, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just a back of the throat infection that you can sometimes get when you get a cold. And now you could just take an antibiotic and be fine, but obviously they didn't have them back then. And the worst part of this is the way his doctors tried to cure him. Because you can read what they did and you could take the context away from it. Be like, they had a man, they did these things, and I'd be like, oh, they tortured him.
Oh, yeah, right. It kind of seems like that.
Yeah, they were trying to cure him. So they burned him to try and see if that would get rid of the illness inside him. And then they drained his blood, and the percentage of the blood they drained from that I could find was like 40%.
Yeah, that's insane.
Which is
80 ounces.
Brutal. So I'm pretty sure at this point he knew he was going to die. He also had a massive fear of being buried alive.
Yeah.
He was convinced it was going to happen, or convinced it had happened a million times before him. So he asked them not to bury his body for a full 3 days after his death, just in case.
Wow. Just in case. You know what? It was, when did he die? Like 1799?
Better safe than sorry.
18th century, yeah. Like, make sure you're really dead first before you go into the vault.
I mean, it still happens.
Oh,
it still happens in the 21st century? Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, God, that's horrible.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, so many times people have woken up at their own funerals or in the morgue.
I don't like that.
It's brutal.
That's upsetting.
Yeah, no, it's very scary.
That's awful.
So fair enough, George.
Fair enough. Yeah. I went to the vault at Mount Vernon, and it was under construction or renovation, so I couldn't really see it very closely, but there he is, him and Martha, to this day.
I gotta check out Mount Vernon.
It's cool.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the fateful lightning of his swift and mighty sword. His true is marching on.
Lincoln obviously did not cheat death in the end, but there are some really interesting things about his assassination. I think one is that a couple of months before, Edwin Booth, who was John Wilkes Booth's brother, saved Lincoln's son when he fell into some train tracks. He jumped down and helped him up. And
did he know it was Lincoln's son?
I'm not sure if he knew it was Lincoln's son, but Lincoln's son probably would have recognized him because Edwin Booth was like an actor. He and John Wilkes Booth were both actors, so they were like known. And then this story came out like decades later that he had saved him shortly before the assassination. But the interesting thing, there's like two really interesting things about the assassination. The first is that the Lincolns wanted to invite the Grants, but Julia Grant hated Mary Lincoln because Mary Lincoln, as we discussed, was a difficult person to get along with. And Mary Lincoln thought that the Grants were like gunning for the presidency. So at one point, Mary and Julia kind of got into it. And Mary was like, well, you just want to be president. Like, you know, how dare you? So when Lincoln invited Ulysses S. Grant to bring his wife to the play, Julia said she didn't want to go. And so Grant made an excuse and said, we can't, sorry, we can't go. Wow. And it's a fascinating, like, what if of history, because if Grant had gone, like, would he have brought more soldiers with him? Would there have been like more bodyguards?
Yeah, that's what was going through my head is like, or would Grant have also just been assassinated as well?
Right. Exactly. And Booth knew that Grant had been invited. It had been advertised. So, you know, yeah, he could have killed both of them. And Grant was, you know, a future president. So that would have changed the course of history.
Right. Yeah. Or it could have, or like you said, there could have been more guards, or one thing could have, it's the butterfly effect at that point. Like so many things could have gone differently.
It is. Instead of the Grants, the Lincolns invited this other young couple. It was a Union veteran named Henry Rathbone and his fiancee, Clara Harris. And after Booth shot Lincoln, Henry Rathbone like jumped up and like kind of grappled with him, and Booth stabbed him and then, you know, famously or infamously jumped from the balcony and escaped. Mm-hmm. But this guy like just had this horrible guilt for the rest of his life. And it sort of really like drove him insane. And he was living in Germany with Clara years and years later, and he murdered her kind of like how the Lincoln assassination had gone. He had a gun and a knife, just like Booth had. And then he spent the rest of his life in an insane asylum.
Oh, wow. So it it broke him to the point where he's like,
it totally broke him.
Recreating it. Wow.
I mean, can you imagine like you're there with the president who gets shot next to you and then you aren't able to stop the assassin? Like that's kind of a lot.
Especially when that president's Lincoln.
Yeah.
Like one of the most influential American presidents of all time.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting, like, after when Booth was on the run, he thought he was going to be seen as, like, a hero, but he got his hands on some newspapers, and even in the South, people were saying this was, like, the wrong thing to do, and, like, the war was basically over at that point, and he had there wasn't that support, and he was devastated about that.
Yeah, so. Just stick to acting. Just stick to what you're good at.
Yeah, too late for him.
John Wilkes Booth, take my advice.
You know, his grave,
stick to acting.
Which I think is in Maryland, people leave pennies because it has Lincoln's face on it.
Nice.
I thought that was kind of cool.
Even in death, there is no peace for John Wilkes Booth.
Washington has that his aura is a bit more difficult to like piece apart because he was alive so long ago and he was so revered during his life that any history is going to be most histories are very favorable. And I guess Lincoln has that too, but there's a lot more known about his, he has a lot of writing. He gave these speeches that were recorded. People wrote a lot about him after he died. And he had this, just really tragic life with his son dying in the White House during the Civil War and all the guilt of that and the weight of the Civil War. I think he's a really fascinating. I think there's a reason why historians like love Lincoln because he's just a really fascinating person. And I feel like Washington, like at least for me, like he's fascinating, but I think Lincoln's has a bit more like going on, like a bit more you can like dig into than Washington. He's harder to get to know.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to round things out. Who is your favorite president?
Boy, people ask me that a lot when I say that I like presidents. It's so hard to say because I think like who's the best president? It's probably Lincoln. I find Richard Nixon to be really fascinating because he's so hated, fair. And I'm just interested in that dynamic, I guess. But yeah, I could read about this stuff like all day. I think it's just great.
Cool. Mine is as someone not well versed in the American history, I'm a strong Teddy Roosevelt man.
He's a good one. Yeah.
I'm a big Teddy. Every time I read something about Teddy Roosevelt, I'm like, yep, that's awesome.
He's pretty great. He had an adventurous life. That's for sure.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. That's what I want to see next. Hollywood producers. Give me a Teddy Roosevelt.
Be a lot of drama there up until the very end.
Yeah. I mean, he got shot and just kept giving a speech.
He got shot right before giving a speech. And he went on to the speech anyway. And you probably even know this story, but the bullet was stopped by the speech in his pocket and his glasses and his coat. And so when he got to the speech, his shirt was all bloody and he was like, I got shot. He said it takes more than that to kill a bull moose, and then just talked for 90 minutes. And his aides were like there, like being like, don't fall off the stage. And he didn't.
That's such a movie moment.
How
many times in a movie has someone had like a Bible in their, or like a notebook in their breast pocket and then it stops a bullet? Like that is a cliche.
There's
but that
photo.
Actually happened to him.
Yeah, it was 50 pages and folded, and there's a photo of like where the bullet went through. It's amazing he survived that, but he didn't win the election. It wasn't enough. Even surviving an assassin's bullet wasn't enough to get him over the finish line that year.
Democracy doesn't always mean, with the freedom of choice comes the freedom of messing up.
Yeah, they elected Wilson instead.
That's all I'll say on that. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to this episode of History Uncovered. Once again, I'm Austin Harvey.
I'm Kalina Fraga.
Check us out at allthat'sinteresting.com, at Real History Uncovered on Instagram, and the History Revealed Facebook page.
Yeah, send us a message. Tell us how much you love the podcast.
Give us a rating on Apple and Spotify. I won't beg for 5 stars, but I would appreciate it.